Welcome back to the Credible Dev YouTube channel. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey from switching from WordPress to Hugo and a couple of other items that I want to talk about as well towards the end of the video. This will be short and sweet, most likely. And before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to all the new subscribers. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing if you're not already. Hit the like button and leave a comment down below. So let's go ahead and jump into it. What we're looking at here on my screen is my website, thecredibledev.com. And the site runs on Hugo, which is a static HTML generator / framework. And my website used to be on WordPress, and I kind of got tired of all the plugins and how sluggish it was, and it didn't perform well anymore on Google for one reason or another. Could have been my hosting provider too, which during that whole transition, I also switched hosting providers to SiteGround, which I'll be talking about here in a moment too, because they have a pretty good Black Friday deal, and they're not sponsoring this video or anything. It's just since I've switched to them, everything's been kind of great. And if you're looking for a hosting provider, maybe you're wanting to start a website or move your website to a new hosting provider, in my opinion, SiteGround is a good choice for it. So anyways, we're looking at my website here. Again, it's running on Hugo. This is a static HTML site. It's pretty quick to respond. You get a lot of the things that you got with WordPress, such as I have this table of contents here, all these social sharing links, things like that. I can embed videos, images, of course. It has this the code boxes with the copy button. A lot of these things are just kind of built into it, ready to go out of the box, and it's been a pretty good transition, but I found some things that made it a little easier for me. And the first thing is what I was doing to update my site basically was uploading the whole like website again. And the reason for that is because it changes certain files like index files and like your sitemap and all this other stuff. So I would just delete the site and upload it all again. And of course, that's not the most efficient thing to do. And looking in their documentation, one of the first options that they recommend for deployment is Rclone. So that's what I've been using ever since then. And if you've never used Rclone before, it does make tasks like this where, you want it to just basically sync with a cloud repository, in this case my website, over SSH or FTP. There's a lot of different options, and it just makes that easy. It's only going to update the files that have actually changed, so it's not going to be removing everything and putting it back or overwriting everything or anything like that. It's just going to sync the files or directories and such that have actually changed. So that's perfect for what I was doing. And they have a document here on their website that kind of covers what you need to do to get started. It's pretty simple to do, and it makes it even easier if you're not comfortable with the all this stuff in the command line. You're still going to have to use the command line, but what you can do is they have a GUI interface. So I'll pull that up here. And it's a web front end that's just going to write to a configuration file basically. And you can see I have a config already here. I'm not going to open that up because it has some details in there I wouldn't want to share necessarily. But if we go into create a new one, we just give it a name. Like if we named it test, or whatever you want to name it. And then you're selecting how that you're wanting to, or what you're wanting to connect to, like FTP, sorry. SSH, SFTP, that's the one that I'm using, and you can see there's a lot of other options in here. There's a lot of other uses for Rclone other than what I'm using it for, but they all revolve around the idea of syncing files. So we could go ahead and select the one that I selected here, show you what it looks like. Basically, you just put in your host, your username, and that kind of stuff, the port number, all the basics. If you're using a key file, which I suggest that you do if you're using SSH or anything like that, having a key file and having a passphrase for that key file, you would put that there. And that just makes everything really easy to do as far as the configuration. And then once you have that configured, what you would actually do is, let me close that out. You would run a command like this. So we're running rclone, we're wanting it to sync, and this public folder here is what's on my local machine. And then this CD Hugo is the name that we gave to that config. So we named that one a second ago test. You would just replace that with test. And then you put a colon, and then you're going to put the directory structure, like the path, to where you want these files to be synced to. You hit enter, and it takes off and starts doing this thing. Simple as that. So the other thing that I've started doing since making this change, because you don't have the visual editor like you had in WordPress, where it made it really easy to, make a page, you lose that in a sense. You could use other markdown editors and such, because all of your posts are going to be written in Markdown now. And if you're not familiar with Markdown, there's tons of guides online on how to get started with Markdown. But this tool in VS Code is an extension called Front Matter. This Front Matter extension gives you a lot of things. So if we go to its dashboard here, and you would get to that once you have it installed by clicking on this little FM icon on the left. You'll have to go through an initial setup where you kind of tell it where your content directory is, what framework that you're using, like Hugo and stuff like that. But once you get it set up, then you'll have this dashboard, and it would show all the posts that I've previously written and a little bit of information about them. And you can just click on one to open that up, like we can click on this one. You have an option over here to start and stop the server. That's going to be for development, so that you can preview what you're doing before you actually, upload it to your host or anything. And then you can, of course, click this open preview button, which if I click it, it's going to open the preview for this particular post here. And this will update live, which the Hugo server that you would run for development already does that, but this kind of puts it all in one interface. So like if right above this header here for install node version manager, if I just type some text here and then save it, we'll see over here on the right that that is live updating. And some other things that it gives you are just some quick ways to insert different types of things, like a header. Like if I click this up here at the top, then it's going to ask me what kind of heading that I want, and I choose a H1, then it's going to go ahead and put that in there for me. And the same thing with the ordered list, unordered list. There's all different types of options here. The code and code block. You can put your text in bold. You can insert images. The images one's been a little finicky for me. It doesn't work perfectly every time, but it's fine. It's not that big of a deal to write some code like this to insert an image. It's not that big of a deal for me. So I don't even find myself using these options for like header and things like that very often. It's almost just as fast to type it out, but if you need these buttons, they're up here, and it just makes things a lot easier. And then over here on the left, you have a lot of information about your post. You can put a title, a description, the content preview, depending on how you have Hugo set up. You can see I have a cover image here, but it doesn't show up here. That's fine. It's not a big deal to me. But you do have that option here. If you want to put the post in draft, meaning when you go to publish the Hugo site, it won't actually publish this post because you're still working on it. You also have your tags and your categories and some other helpful information here as well, like creating templates and such. So this has been a great help just to speed up the ability to write a new post. It's been great for that purpose. Because like I said, I don't use many of these other options, even the keywords and stuff like that. I tend to type all this out just out of habit. That's what I was doing to start with. But I do like how everything's in one interface in VS Code. Just makes things a lot simpler. So if we take a look at the performance that I've seen since making this change, which I made this change, it was around October, the beginning of October, so probably like right in here is when I switched from WordPress to Hugo, and I switched to SiteGround. And once I'd done that, it continued to dip down a little bit, but I'm kind of starting to see a comeback in traffic. And, it may not be exactly related to what I've done here, but the site definitely loads a lot faster than it did on WordPress. And site speed makes a really big difference in your Google rankings. But Google tends to change their algorithm with how sites get ranked from time to time. So that could have played into all this too. and the changes I made maybe weren't as involved in this comeback as what I would like to think. Who really knows? But the other thing is SiteGround. I mentioned a minute ago that I'd switched to them, and that they are running this Black Friday deal, and I have a link down in the description below. Pretty good deal. Of course, this is going to be a year. You're going to have to pay for like a year up front. I think if you do monthly, you'd probably have to pay more than this $1.99 if you just went month to month. So you have to pay this out for a year, but it's still a great deal for their hosting. So if you're interested in that, use the link down in the description. It helps me out, helps the channel out. I appreciate it. You certainly don't have to. You can just go to siteground.com and get the same thing accomplished. So with all of that said, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, and you may notice this in the last couple of videos, that I'm in Windows. Why am I in Windows and not Linux? Maybe you thought this was a Linux channel and I should only use Linux. And, you know, to be honest, I do use Linux most of the time, but not all the time. And what brought me back to Windows, actually, I didn't even have Windows installed on my device up until a couple of weeks ago. It was purely Linux running on my machine. But I needed to take a exam, a Microsoft exam. And a lot of online exams are this way. I take a few courses for college as well. And whenever I do proctored exams online, you can't use Linux. And the same thing was true for these Microsoft exams, which are done through Pearson VUE is how they do their proctoring and everything. And, you know, unfortunately, Linux is not an option. And even running the Windows like in a VM in Linux doesn't really work either from what I've read. I've seen where some people have gotten away with it, but it's a little too risky. I mean, you spend a lot of money to take this exam. You don't want to risk anything. So I had to install Windows back on my laptop, and you know, ever since then I've spent a little more time in Windows than I had in Linux, because I hadn't been in Windows in a while. On my personal computer, my work computer runs Windows solely. We're a Windows shop. We don't have any Linux devices or anything like that other than servers. And so I'm familiar with Windows 11. That's what runs on my work computer. But I hadn't used Windows 11 on my home laptop, my personal laptop, in quite some time. So I just wanted to test out the experience with it. Also, I'd gotten a new microphone. You may have noticed my voice had changed in some recent videos. And that's because I got a new blue microphone, and it comes with some additional software that helps you with the sound, an equalizer, and some other stuff. That particular piece of software doesn't run on Linux either. Of course, there are other tools and things built into OBS Studio that can accomplish somewhat of the same goals, but I wanted to try that out as well. Also, if you haven't noticed, we're kind of in the midst of a series where we're doing Windows Server related things. So, you know, maybe I want to incorporate my personal device into that whenever we're doing some type of testing. Who knows? Another thing that I've really strongly considered doing is moving away from Proxmox and into Hyper-V, which I would be running on Windows. I've thought about doing that. There's a couple of things holding me back. The biggest one is the Synology that I set up in there. I have some data on the Synology that I'd probably want to move off or do something else with, and you know, it would be a bit of work, and I'm just not ready to do it yet. But maybe once that happens, or after the beginning of the year sometime, I plan on possibly building a new server, which would just be a desktop, that I would replace the one that I'm currently running Proxmox on. That would be a great time to make that switch back to Hyper-V if I was going to do that. But the Hyper-V might play into some of the stuff that we do in the Windows Server series as well. And, you know, when we get to that point, we'll see what happens. But for now, it's staying on Proxmox. But I do have that in the back of my mind, switching that to Hyper-V. So I would like to have your thoughts on it. You know, if anybody's interested in Hyper-V material, I know that the Linux community tends to lean towards Proxmox and, you know, other tools that are open source or at least Linux based and not so much Windows based. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not, you know, a solely Linux person. I'll run different operating systems. I don't mind Windows. My laptop does run Linux better than it runs Windows. but that's not the case on my work laptop. I don't think they have similar specs, but for whatever reason, the performance of Windows on my work laptop is much different than it is on my personal laptop. Not sure why that is, but you would think with similar specs you'd have a similar experience, but that's not quite true in my case. So again, I don't mean to ramble here. I just kind of wanted to explain why I went back to Windows, and it was mainly because of taking that exam. But then that led me down. Oh well, let's install some software on here and try it out. And I may run into some school software that I'm going to need Windows for that just won't run on Linux. That hasn't happened yet. The current course that I'm taking is on machine learning, and it's using the R language. And RStudio is available on Linux, so no problem there. Any of the Python stuff we run into in that course is also obviously going to work on Linux as well. So again, don't want to ramble here. That's really all I got for you today. If you have any questions or anything, leave a comment. If you like this video, want to see more like this, hit the like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I really would appreciate it. Hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, and see you next time.